Good afternoon. It's a really big honor for both Hayek and Bass's Foundation to have Professor Calvin Hayes here with us this afternoon in our conference. And I'll just make a very brief introduction. Pauper and Hayek relationship I think it's fascinating. A couple of weeks ago, I finished to read a book by Peter Munz, which is titled Beyond Wittgenstein's Poker. And in that book, Munz say that Pauper and Hayek relationship was basically all based on the gratitude that Pauper felt for Hayek, because Hayek helped him to leave New Zealand. On the other hand, two or 3 days ago, I received an email from a friend of mine who was very happy and very excited because he has just finished written a chapter of his thesis on Pauper and Hayek, and that he considers that he proved that Pauper and Hayek have a very special relationship and are very interconnected. So it's fascinating, and I'm pretty sure that the next lecture will throw some light on that subject. So go ahead, Professor.
Okay. Thank you very much, Federico. I think I'm going to begin by explaining the title of my paper, which comes in two parts. Now, actually, for some reason, I don't know if it's my fault or not, but the title of the conference got included in the title of the paper, when really I wanted the title to begin with the Hayek-Popper paradox, which is, I don't know the Peter Munz book, but it sounds like it would be involved in that, because there's so many conflicting views about their relationship. But I certainly disagree if Munz thinks it's only because Hayek assisted Pauper in getting the book published and the job. I think there's striking similarities and striking differences, and that's why I wanted to start with what I call the Hayek-Popper paradox, and it actually should be pluralized. And I do explain it in my abstract very briefly, although I've changed the emphasis in that from what's in the abstract. But what I think what I do want to begin with is answering a question that some of the audience may have about the second half of my title. And if you're wondering about the two names in the second half, before you ask, my answer is yes. It is the same John Lennon who sang for the Beatles that I mean, compared to Vladimir Lenin, who wrote State and Revolution in 1917 and then started, of course, the Bolshevik Revolution. No prizes for figuring that Lenin out. But if you not only figured out it was John Lennon, but why, it was the post-Beatles John Lennon who sang Imagine in 1975. A beautiful, if somewhat naive, vision of his picture of the ideal utopian world. And it's the idea of utopia that provides the unifying theme for this paper and enables me to define both the paradox in part one and the dilemma of part two. Now, yesterday, I think I shocked my wife, and I think we're the only two people from Canada here. And when I told her I'm going to start my talk by singing John Lennon's Imagine, and she looked at me horrified, but you don't know how to sing. And I don't. She's right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the words of John Lennon's Imagine and then proceed into the Pauper-Hayek paradox. And I'll only sing it when maybe during the question period if I get tired and want the audience to disperse. So here are the words which probably most of you have already heard, or you may have the music. It's a beautiful song, but imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say that I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us and the world will be as one. Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger. a brotherhood of man. He'd probably have to change that today to the siblinghood of humanity, but in those days you could use that language. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say that I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us and the world will live as one. Okay, that's what I'm going to build the utopian talk on, because that's a very nice, concise summary of what utopian socialism, since at least the 1840s, has been based on. And I'm going to say a few more things, of course, about that later. But first, I want to get into what I call the Hayek-Popper paradox. And what I'm going to do is essentially, of course, plagiarize my upcoming book on Hayek and Pauper that Routledge is going to be publishing this fall. Chapter 8 I entitled, Is Liberal Utopia an Oxymoron? Now, when I originally put together the proposal for my book 3 years ago, my answer to that question was going to be yes. In other words, I was going to agree with Pauper. There cannot be a liberal utopia. But I've changed my mind since then, which, of course, a good Popperian should do. Actually, in some ways, being a Popperian is a win-win situation. If your theory gets refuted, well, this shows Pauper is right about refutation. If it doesn't get refuted, then you're correct. But in this case, I've changed my mind, and I've come to agree with Hayek that there can be and should be such a thing as a liberal utopia. So I'm going to begin with the words of Hayek himself. Quote, utopia, like ideology, is a bad word today. And it is true that most utopias aim at radically redesigning society and suffer from internal contradictions which make their realization impossible. But an ideal picture of a society which may not be wholly achievable, or a guiding conception of the overall order to be aimed at, is nevertheless not only the indispensable precondition of any rational policy, but also the chief contribution that science can make to the solution of the problems of practical policy. That comes from pages 57 and 58 of, I don't have the Law, Liberty, and Legislation. I think it's volume 1, but it might not. It might be volume 2, but it does come from Law, Liberty, and Legislation. Okay, so I'm going to explore in detail the Hayek-Popper paradox, which consists of several elements, but including the epistemological one, which Matthew got into today, particularly the difference between the subjectivism of the Austrians that Hayek accepted and Popper's more objective knowledge. But I don't want to get sidetracked onto that, except to point out that both Hayek and Popper use epistemological arguments against utopianism, particularly of the socialists, but also of non-socialist utopias as well. Okay, well, Pauper rejects utopian schemes of any kind. Hayek advocated the need for a liberal utopia as an ideal to counter both standard left-wing utopias and as an alternative to the merely conservative resistance to radical change. Now, on this issue, I thought for a long time Pauper has a clear advantage, based partly on the distinction between ideals and obligations. To take an example, the society described in John Lennon's Imagine, which I just did, would be better than the present world we live in. To say that does not logically imply that anyone ought to act to create such a society. But that's only the start of the argument. Now, what I do then in Chapter 8 is move on to a question. What is utopianism? Those of you familiar with Pauper will recognize it's not a question he would have liked. He did not like what is questions. But I frequently disagree with Pauper despite being strongly inclined to his point of view. So I'm going to start by answering what is utopianism. Utopia etymologically means a good place, but it also has an ambiguous meaning because it also means no place. The original use of it, as most of you may know, comes from Thomas More in the 16th century.